You're looking extra handsome today from where I'm sitting.
Oh, so, thank you.
Thank you. And I don't say that to just any case looks.
Ooh. Yeah, I do have this new high quality camera that makes me look a lot better than I actually look. So,
nah, man, it's just showing the truth more accurately.
Oh. Hello, and welcome to the Interstate Gamers Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin, a.k.a. K-Slugs.
My name is Peter, a.k.a. Deal For Real, and I'm also your host.
Well, damn, dude. It has been a hot minute since we released an episode. But hey, we're back better than ever.
Yeah. We don't have any episodes planned after this at this moment. But you know what? For this moment right here, we're back, baby. Yeah, we just did some epic research and saw that the last episode we did, Earthbound, that came out in September 2022. And as of recording, it's January 2024. So, you know.
Yeah. But we're back, and I'm happy to be doing this again. So welcome, everyone, to the 59th episode. I'm still glad that I remembered to do that.
Ooh.
And say what number episode it is. Maybe we'll get to 69 in like 10 years. Who knows? But
yeah, one episode per year.
Yeah. But yeah. So anyway, what game do we have today, Pete Boy?
Boy, howdy. We have quite the game. There's a lot to talk about with this one, I reckon. But yeah, the game we're talking about is a N64 certified classic, Conker's Bad Fur Day.
Hell yeah, brother. And what is the context-sensitive information pertaining to this game?
Oh boy, there's a lot. Well, first I'll say that this is one of those very rare IG episodes where we actually played the game together.
Yeah.
When I was visiting you and your lovely household and family over the Christmas time. And yeah, we played this game. We spent a solid, 4 to 5 hours maybe one night playing this game.
Mm-hmm.
Which, according to howlongtobeat.com, our favorite website, is about half of the game's average duration. Yeah. So, you know, we can kind of assume we played half the game. We did not finish this one, sorry to say.
We gave it the old college try.
We certainly did. So yeah, Conker's Bad Fur Day, there's a whole lot of lore that I've only scratched the surface of in my own research, but I'd love to dive into it further because it seems really interesting. But yeah, this is a Rareware game. It is a 3D platformer, which we know Rare has done their fair share of those, especially during this time frame. So Conker's Bad Fur Day, originally it was going to be a kind of very similar to Banjo-Kazooie, family-friendly, colorful, kind of happy-go-lucky platforming game. But it was revealed at E3 in 1998, and a lot of people had some good things to say about it. Like they said, oh, it's really fun, and the graphics are great, and the audio is great, and all this stuff. But a lot of people also criticized it for being way too similar to Banjo-Kazooie and just a bunch of other games that were out at the time. Like, oh, it's so happy and cheerful. Some people even thought it was way too happy and cheerful. They were like, this makes me feel like I'm just eating a bowl of the sugariest cereal. It's just way too bright and cheery or whatever. Yeah, so they got this criticism about the game being like that. And so Rare, I think specifically there was one person at Rare who thought what if we do a complete 180 and turn this into an adult-oriented game with lots of some parody humor, but also a lot of lowbrow humor and scat humor and, you know, excessive gore and violence and guns and all sorts of wackiness. They really threw the whole kitchen sink in terms of quote unquote mature content that they possibly could. But yeah, I was reading about that whole process of how they pivoted and the way that they pivoted internally. And there's probably a really cool development history to go into. But one thing that I learned just a few minutes ago was that they also rolled out a marketing campaign to match kind of the adult oriented nature of the game. So they had these special urinal mats or something that they would put in bars and restaurants that advertise the game. And they would have these, there's also a multiplayer part of the game, which actually I don't think you and I touched when we were playing it. but they got a Playboy model from the era to host these like multiplayer competitions at college campuses. So they'd like try to get all the frat boys to come and like play their game, which is just like, that just sounds like peak 2000s, 1990s to me. Like, so yeah.
I do want to mention that this game in particular in the retro video game market is a hot commodity. Like it is really hard to find this game for a cheap price. Well, like actually you can't find it for a cheap price. If you do, you should snap it up because, you know, you're going to be spending, I think like used, like not even in a box or anything. It's like $150 or something.
Yeah.
Like, and like, that's pretty insane for a game of this nature. And so to me, I was always curious because of that reason to see what this game was all about. I was like, there's got to be a reason, you know, it's so expensive. And you know, I guess I kind of get it, but like, I guess we'll get more into that, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it worth your $150? Listen to the rest of the episode to find out.
Yeah. I mean, it occupies a really interesting space in Rare history and especially Nintendo history. I mean, like, when can you think of Nintendo having any game like this, much less one that was basically by like a second party developer, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned this game came out in 2001. I looked at the chronological list of N64 games and only 13 N64 games were released after this game. So like that's how close to the end of the life cycle it was.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting because I feel like those late era N64 games aren't usually talked about very much, at least from what I see. So yeah, this was one of the last N64 games and also one of the most controversial and just one that had one of the craziest backstories. So like it's very understandable to me that it fetches that high price because like it's just there's so much lore around it.
Yeah, I think that puts a lot of good context around it too because like it actually came out after Banjo-Tooie. So like when you think about it from that sense, that might have, you know, affect some of my scores thinking about it in that regard, but we'll get to that in a second. So anyway, speaking of the scores, why don't we dive right in to the gameplay? And actually, I'll go ahead and start us off with this section.
Sure.
And I'll start off by saying that the gameplay wasn't great at all. The mechanics felt very clunky. The platforming was just kind of, you know, finicky. And the focus of the game, though, I guess, really wasn't on the gameplay so much. I think the game is entirely meant to be just, you know, like a bunch of random and fun BS to do in this adult themed world. And I think it, you know, it had more of a focus on like, I want to say the storytelling, but just like the world interactions being fun and funny and entertaining more than the actual gameplay. But, you know, coming back and visiting it, from nowadays, you know, when gameplay is something that is definitely more fleshed out in games these days, you're just kind of like, how can I have fun when this game sucks? But, you know, there's other certain things like, you know, I'm trying to figure out how to explain it. There's a button that I kind of alluded to it in the beginning called like context sensitive. Mm-hmm. And so when you step on this pad where you would like do something called context sensitive, and it's a joke that they say in the game, you get whatever item you need to help you progress in the moment. So like, I was kind of joking with you guys of like, oh, this is the most broken thing in all of like video game lore. Like, you just get whatever you need to succeed in the moment.
Yeah.
But there would be like an instance where, you know, you need like a slingshot or something like that, and you need to shoot like bees or something. I don't know. And the shooting mechanics were awful. They just weren't accurate at all. I'm just like, this is worse than GoldenEye.
No.
But yeah, shooting was terrible. There was the whole issue where we got stuck, you know, out of context. This is going to sound weird, but we got stuck on a flower's boobs for a very long time.
Yes, we did. Bouncing on the boobs was a lot more difficult than you'd think it would be.
Yeah, than it should have been, because we were just trying to get to where we needed to go, and it just wouldn't happen. So, and then that was kind of the other thing. Well, maybe I didn't really speak to this, but not knowing where to go was kind of a huge issue. And it was just kind of like you're just aimlessly wandering around through this world, not knowing how to progress from one moment to the next. It wasn't necessarily always hard to figure out, but sometimes it was just kind of like, I don't know what to do now. So those are just some of the critiques I have of the gameplay. What do you think?
I agree with pretty much everything you said. One interesting thing that I took away is how the controls and the mechanics and such were all very simplified compared to a game like Banjo, where you don't only have the option to run and jump, but you also can fly and do a ground pound and do like the beak barge and whatever all those moves are called. This game really like takes all of that and just kind of pushes it away and just gives you the basic abilities of like running, jumping, doing a little float to extend your jump a little bit. You have a frying pan as your weapon, which you just swing with a press of the B button, and like that's it. That's all you have for attacking, right? And otherwise, the game does depend on that context-sensitive mechanic that you mentioned, which I think is kind of cool because, like, the fact that they dedicate this whole mechanic to the idea of it being whatever you need at the time, I do think that, at least theoretically, it allows them to come up with cool set pieces where you don't have to, like, necessarily rely on the basic mechanics because they have free license to do whatever they want.
Yeah.
With, like, that moment. And so I think that's cool, at least as an idea, but I think in practice, the results are not always actually fun, like you were talking about.
Yeah, it wasn't executed very well.
Yeah, we also had a lot of camera struggles. I don't think this game, if I remember, it didn't give you actual direct control of the camera. It was always fixed and like moving on its own accord. I'm not quite sure if I remember that correctly, but I do know that we had a lot of camera complaints, which is kind of par for the course in these older 3D games, but still. And so as far as like that simplification idea that I mentioned, they also did that in terms of like collectibles and progressing through the game because, in a far cry from Banjo and especially DK64 where you have to collect like 200 unique kinds of items.
Yeah.
Exaggerated obviously. But in this game, I'm again, if memory serves, it's been a little while since we played this. All you collect is money. And the money is what you get. Like every time you complete like a little mission or quest, you get like $100 or some multiple of $100. And that's like the currency that you use to unlock new areas.
Yeah. I think there are in like certain side quests collectibles that you can obtain, but I think for the most part, it is just money. And then there's a lot of like picking things up and carrying them from one place to the next.
Right.
So
yeah, so there is that. But as far as like persistent collectibles that you're keeping track of through the whole game, I think it is just the money. And I just think that's an interesting thing to mention, considering how in Banjo you have like all the notes to collect in each level and the jiggies and you have the Jinjos.
Yeah.
And, Donkey Kong 64 takes this to the extreme where you have like different colored bananas for each of the 5 Kongs and you have like this, that, and the other. And I mean, I think that's kind of a meme at this point, so I won't elaborate on it much further.
It is interesting how it's a simplified rare game and you don't really encounter that too often. And I think it alludes to the fact of what we were talking about earlier. It's just how that really wasn't the point of the game. The point of the game was really just to be like, you sit down and you have fun with it kind of thing.
Right.
And I think in that sense, I think the game did what it was designed to do well. It's just that I think over time, a lot of the particular mechanics and the context sensitive mini games almost just weren't always executed well. But the idea, like you said, of the context sensitive button was pretty cool. And it does open up that creativity. I agree with you there. Yeah.
I think theoretically, I like the gameplay ideas a lot more than I actually did while playing the game and watching you play the game.
In practice.
So it's kind of hard for me to assign a score to this category for that reason. But I do have a score written down, and I think I've said pretty much everything I want to say about the gameplay.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much to add. I've crunched my numbers, and if you have a score ready, right?
I do.
Why don't you go ahead and give your score first?
Yeah, I gave the gameplay of this game a nice round, hot, cold 50.
50? Interesting. I gave it a little bit higher than that, but now I'm like second guess. No, I think I like my score. My score, I gave it a 62. Not like super horrible, but not great,
Yeah.
I think, I had mentioned earlier off the air that we gave, Tarzan a 47. So I kind of like took that into account. And it's a much better game than Tarzan in terms of gameplay. Like I had more fun playing it than Tarzan.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's interesting.
I kind of feel like now I've underscored it because I guess I'm trying to balance like the expectations for a rare game like this versus what it actually was versus how much fun I had versus how much I like the ideas theoretically.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to like, you know what? I'm gonna do a rare move. I'm gonna amend my score after saying it on the air. I'm gonna change that to I'll give it a 60. Screw it.
All right. Cool.
You've talked me up.
There we go. All right. You're welcome, Rare, for helping you up the score on your crappy video game. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But let's move on to the aesthetics.
Oh, yeah. I think traditionally I'm the one who kicks these off.
Yeah, maybe so.
Normally you like to ask me to start with the visuales.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think this game is similar to other rare games of this kind as far as visuals go, because I found that they were really good, actually. Everything's very colorful. Character models and textures are pretty detailed. There's the typical kind of like variety of worlds and environments, maybe not to such an extreme as in something like Banjo, because like the game does kind of have like a sort of cohesive hub world and then offshoots of it. So like thematically things are kind of related, but as far as the quality of the visuals, I say they're all really good. And one thing I was impressed by was the lip syncing, or at least the facial animations that they did to match up with characters talking. I found that to be really impressive. That paired very nicely with the full voice acting, which we can talk about more in the audio section. Yeah, I feel like technically speaking, it was all really good. The only problem is that sometimes they use their technical prowess to give a lot of detail to things such as diarrhea.
Yeah.
And the guts and insides and carcasses of, exploding cows and, gored creatures and, a mouse that exploded because it ate too much cheese and things like that where, maybe depending on your sense of humor, you may or may not find that to be a good use of their visual skills and technologies.
Right.
But yeah, I found it all to be, par for the course for rare games, which in this case is a good thing. So I honestly have pretty high praise for the visuals.
Yeah, I kind of wrote down that really the worst thing about the visuals was when there was just kind of something uncomfortably inappropriate. Like, there was an entire poo arc, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
you're just there and you're not like, visually speaking, poo isn't just like awesome. Like if you like if you like shit, then more power to you. But visually it wasn't the greatest. But other than that, I think you're right. It was a very bright and charming world. It was really fun, full of neat looking characters that had a lot of charm and personality. And I didn't even think about like the lip syncing thing. That's a good point, because I think that's like revolutionary technology for this day and age, or that time period. So that the fact that they were able to do that was really cool. And I think, if I'm thinking about it rationally, I think they did that to make it more relatable to the people, their target audience, basically. And when you would mention like the college, like frat thing, it kind of feels like, visually speaking, and in a lot of other elements through the game as well, that's like what their target audience is. And so you're thinking like some like college age person, you show them a video game in a time period where video games aren't as prevalent as they are now. I think it might appeal to them, a bit more. They, maybe they're at a party, some frat party, and they want to play this game with like a talking raccoon and jump on flower boobs, like.
The flower boobs I think would be a huge hit at the frat house.
Yeah, exactly. So, all interesting points. I did think it was also interesting. It had blood and gore, which you also didn't see a lot for this particular console.
Right.
And, it was interesting to see it and like experience it real time.
Right.
Because you're like, wow, this is like 64 blood and gore. And it's so weird because like it's so off-putting because it doesn't feel like it should happen.
Right. Especially in a rare game and one that is otherwise like so, bright and colorful and happy-go-lucky.
Yeah.
Like all these factors go into it to make it like such a weird kind of cognitive dissonance kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's not like we have problem with blood and gore in video games. It's just like it's just so weird how it fit into this era of gaming and like this particular console and it being Nintendo and it being Rare, not having any other sort of games that are like this. And so it was just like, wow, this is so different. And it was interesting to experience.
Yeah, totally agreed.
But I don't really have anything other than that.
I don't think so either. I mean, for me, this was kind of a simple section to evaluate.
Yeah, true. I was kind of joking around. I sent you a screenshot before we got on this podcast, and I was like, we typically go like write our notes for this episode and kind of some things that we want to talk about, bullet points and things like that. And I had wrote that for the visuals, I wrote, in some ways, the visuals were charming. And then for the audio, I wrote, in some ways, the audio was charming.
Right. Did you make them the same verbiage like on purpose, or did you only realize that after the fact?
Well, I kind of wrote it like to start, spawning some ideas.
Right.
And so like I did it first for the audio. And then I was like, it'd be funny if I wrote the same thing for the visuals. So I did. And then I sent you a screenshot.
And you were right. It was funny.
Yeah. Anyway, not to get too sidetracked, but let's go ahead and give our scores for this. I guess I'll start because I think you started the last one. But for the visuales, I will give it a hot, maybe not fresh because I'm stewing on this idea for a bit, but I'm going to give it like a 78.
78.
Yeah.
Wow. You and I came out with very different numbers at the end of this. I gave it a 95.
95. Wow. Yeah. That is a bit up there. Me personally, I don't know if I'd put it up that high in terms of just like, I try to tend to think about all the other games that we've rated. And then there's so much context sensitivity around this,
Oh, of course.
But I tried to think about the era in which this came out, and it is pretty good for that stage. But then I also think about, Banjo-Tooie came out in 2000, and this game came out in 2001, and I would argue that Banjo-Tooie looks a lot better than this game. And so that kind of took my score into account. But the other interesting thing is, I think this relates to visuals, and I kind of want to touch on it. I don't think it requires a memory expansion pack, does it?
I don't remember.
It didn't seem, well, I already have one, so maybe I just didn't notice it. But that was the big thing that you had to have for like Tooie and like Donkey Kong 64, these kind of bright and vibrant worlds with a lot of these graphics. It required that. So I'm wondering if Conker's required that, because I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't.
I just did some research on the down low, except it is now on the up high since I said it out loud. It turns out it did not require an expansion pack.
See? So that's what I was kind of thinking. And I could kind of tell, right? Because it felt like a game that wouldn't have required that. So all of that to say, I think your score is completely valid.
Well, it's funny you say that because once again, I'm thinking about reducing it a little bit. But you know what? I'm going to, I lack the Tooie, the Banjo-Tooie context that you have, because I watched you play that game a little while, many years ago.
Yeah.
I'm not very familiar with it though. So maybe if I had that experience, I would feel a little more similarly to you. But yeah, I feel like the game is very technically impressive, and I was impressed while playing it, and all of my brain signals are telling me that a 95 was a good enough score to give it without belaboring the point for too long. So yeah. I'll go ahead and stick with that 95.
Stick with it, brother.
Yeah.
And that'll move us on to our next aesthetics section of the audio.
Ooh.
And I guess I will talk about the audio a little bit. In some ways, the audio was charming.
Ooh. Which ways, Kevin?
In a multitude of ways. I can't really remember a lot of the tunes that were in the game, honestly. Just kind of looking back, it's been a few weeks since we've played this, but one song I can remember is the Pooh song, because the giant poo monster can actually sing opera pretty well, and the song slapped pretty hard. I'm not going to lie.
It did.
That was like the best part of that entire section. And it really brought that section to life, I think. And I know we keep going back to that level of the game was so...
I feel the need to very briefly explain that level because we keep mentioning it.
Yeah.
It's like a dung beetle mountain is basically what it is. And so like you enter the mountain at some point and then you're underground and it's like this entire, flowing feces everywhere environment. And there's like corn. There's like little corn enemies.
Yeah.
Because, corn can sometimes pass through undigested, right? So like there's little corn enemies. And then there's a big poo monster who's the final boss of this area. He has little corn guys for teeth. Yeah. He's just a big blob who rises out and he's singing about his shit and all this stuff. And it's like you said, it really brings the whole thing to life. And it was like genuinely enjoyable. Like I was having a great time. I was like, this is awesome. Katie, your wife, she was not present for this because the rest of the game had kind of, tested her boundaries a little bit before we got to this point, which is very understandable. I was feeling similarly, but I said, she would love this part.
Yeah.
Because like, who wouldn't? It was just very charming.
Yeah. The poo monster could sing pretty well. But yeah, that was the most like prolific part of the audio that really stood out to me. There were, I think, the sound effects. You know how I'm big on sound effects. I thought the sound effects went really well with the game.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of farting noises. There was a lot of just noises in general that fit with the theme of the game.
Right.
Sometimes inappropriate, sometimes not. Or like, when you're hitting someone with the frying pan is like the classic Looney Tunes sound.
Yeah. Love that sound.
Yeah. But I think it was pretty good overall, the audio. I don't know if it's like amazing, but I think it did accomplish what it needed to.
Right. I kind of echo your comment about the music that you made earlier, where like I don't really remember any of it, but I do remember finding it pretty catchy during the time that we were playing the game. I also want to go back to the voice acting and the full voice acting, might I add, for the whole game, which again I found really impressive. This was not the first time that Rare had done this because they had done that with Perfect Dark, which I think came out in 2000. So it was not like necessarily the most revolutionary thing at the time. But I did really enjoy the voice acting in general. I think that I think it was all staff, just all like Rare staff who provided their vocal and singing talents even. But I found that they really brought a lot of life to the characters. Sometimes the comments that they made, like specifically the dialogue, could be of a type of humor that has not aged well and that maybe we don't appreciate nowadays. But aside from that, like the actual delivery of the lines and the dialogue, I found was really enjoyable. Some of it does use like kind of a classic dry British sense of humor, which I personally really like. So when they have voices to match that, I really enjoyed that.
To kind of comment on your like voice acting thing, that is something I forgot to kind of mention. And that I thought the voice acting really did bring the game to life, kind of what you alluded to. But then I did notice that due to the limitations of the technology at the time, that the delivery of like the voice acting was like, it was slow, I want to say. Like it was like slow to deliver. Like the main villain, for example, would just like, it was like, what was it? Like a lion of some sort?
Yeah, he was like a panther or something.
Yeah. And so he would like very breathily speak. He'd be like, oh. and then he would speak and it was just kind of like dragging on and on. And you're just like, okay,
the pacing. Yeah. The pacing could be a little off. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right about that.
And so it lagged a little bit, but other than that, like, there's not too many examples of good voice acting in the N64 era. So I think you could take this one as a good example of voice acting in the N64 era.
Yeah. I was also reading, this gets a little bit into the contents, but as far as like the writing process of the game, I read that a lot of elements of the game were largely unscripted. And like certain cutscene dialogue and even like gameplay ideas were like thought of in a very like kind of firing from the hip sort of manner. Huh. And I think that the voice acting reflects that in a good way. Like there were some parts where I found that characters would like stutter or they'd like say like little random comments that to me sounded like fairly unscripted.
Yeah.
or something like that. And I just always appreciate that in media in general. I just like that idea.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So that was another thing that, appealed to me as a big voice acting guy.
Yeah.
I appreciated that.
Cool.
I also have a fun fact about the aforementioned frying pan sound effect.
Okay.
It's especially appropriate because you brought it up first, actually.
Yeah.
But I read, fun fact, originally Conker's weapon of choice was a baseball bat, but they replaced it with a frying pan specifically because the frying pan makes a funnier sound. And they were like, we really wanted that sound effect to be in the game, so God damn it, we took his baseball bat away. We gave him a frying pan.
I mean, that's valid. Now,
Yeah.
I would like to question why he couldn't have both, but hey,
Maybe there's a context sensitive part with a baseball bat
maybe
that we didn't
so.
get to.
Maybe so. But that's going to do it for audio for me. I don't know about you.
I agree, man.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and give your score?
Well, this is the part I mentioned after you sent the screenshot about both the visuals and the audio. In some ways, they're both charming. For me, I relate to that because I actually gave them the same score, meaning that I gave the audio also a 95.
Oh, dang. Okay.
Yeah.
For this one, I think I'm going to have to give it somewhere in the same ballpark as well. Maybe a little bit higher than the visuals. So I'm thinking somewhere around like an 81.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that fits. That'll do it for the aesthetic section, and that'll move us on to the final section of content.
Ooh, final boss.
Final boss.
Yeah, so with everything we've talked about as far as like the greater context or context of the game and how it was created, I think the audience probably already has an idea of like the main selling point of the game being the adult content, the humor, the this, the that, and the other. I mentioned this earlier. I think that on one hand, it has like pretty juvenile, poop humor, blood and gore humor. Like there's this thing that I kept realizing where like pretty much every character we met in the game, it felt like at some point, like we would kill them or they would die in some like grisly way just for like shock value.
Yeah.
And then there's too many examples to list, honestly. But like that's one of those elements of the game that makes the sense of humor really tiresome. And so that part I don't feel too great about. But then on the other hand, there is a lot of humor that is like parodies of pop culture. Some of it I was reading about after the fact during my research, like not all of it I experienced while actually playing the game, but like there's references to the Alien movie, for instance. There's other references to like big pop culture moments of the time that maybe I missed or just didn't see. But in addition to that, there's also just like that funny, dry British sense of humor that I mentioned earlier. I feel like that came through a lot in just a lot of the word choice and the dialogue. So for me, like as far as that big aspect of the game, there's parts that I simultaneously really like and really dislike.
Yeah.
Or at least just am not entertained by, right? So yeah, I think that's kind of the inside you there are two wolves. This game has two very different wolves inside of it as far as like the sense of humor goes.
Yeah. You mentioned, the surprising elements that kind of pop up here and there where like the shock value, they'll do something for shock value. Like, as you mentioned earlier, a rat that eats too much cheese just randomly explodes and you're like, oh shit, I didn't see that coming. I think that really appeals to the early 2000s frat target audience. So in that sense, if you're thinking about it from like, who is this game talking to? It's kind of funny that we've created this narrative of that's like what this game is like. This is what this game is like supposed to be for. But it kind of does feel that way. Like,
right.
You're kind of feeling like a frat bro's like sitting down playing this game and maybe they're at a party or something and they're just like, they're all drunk having a good time and all of a sudden this rat explodes and everybody's like, oh shit. And they're just, they're all having a good time. So
the carcass is still there. And, oh my God, I left the area and came back and the carcass is still there, dude. Which is true.
Yeah. So like in that sense, if I'm thinking about it from that perspective, I think it works. I think the shock value works.
Yeah.
And I also want to touch on the point that, you were talking about earlier with like, there's two different types of humor. I definitely really felt that tug too of like, there were like a handful of like crude humor jokes and a lot of those I didn't really relate to, but then there was a lot of like dry British humor stuff that I thought was really funny.
Yeah.
And so then like context sensitive, like that was just like right up my alley on what kind of jokes that I like, super
right. And
dry.
that was like right at the beginning of the game too.
Yeah. And like super ironic humor. And, like you said, right at the beginning of the game. So I'm like, oh yeah, this game is going to be great. But then all of a sudden you get like the shock and awe value and you're like, I wasn't expecting this at all. So I think it's kind of like, it is shocking sometimes in the sense of like, holy shit, I wasn't expecting to be in this mindset of just like random bullshit.
Right.
But it's a very interesting blend of humor. And I think that's really unique. I don't think it like scores one way or the other for me. I just think it's interesting. And it's interesting to talk about.
Right.
What we like to talk about a lot in terms of content too is how long the game is. And the game's a rather short game. And I think a game of this nature, you don't really want it to be too long of a game.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, let's say you enjoy this game and you find it really fun and you find it really funny. Is it a game that you play again?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Because for me, it feels like watching like a comedy movie, right? You watch the movie, but you're not like, I want to go see that comedy movie. Typically, I don't find myself rewatching a lot of comedy movies, but maybe that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
But unless it's like, Nacho Libre or something like super quotable, even if I imagine myself enjoying this game, which I'm not saying I did or didn't, but even if I thought it was one of the greatest games ever, I don't know that I want to go back and replay it because it just like, it feels like you get the content you need from it.
Right.
And the gameplay is not like fascinating enough to want you to replay it.
Yeah. I see what you mean. I kind of agree with you there.
Yeah.
I want to touch on another aspect of the humor, which I didn't really before, but there's a lot of like fourth wall breaking and parodying of like the format of video games itself. One of the very first examples of this is that you're introduced to chocolate as the health mechanic in this game. And specifically, like the chocolate in the game is like some little floating squares of chocolate. They're floating and spinning around like very typical 3D platformer stuff. And they make fun of that by calling it anti-gravity chocolate. There's a villainous evil scientist and he's important for the plot, but also like this is one of his inventions is this anti-gravity chocolate.
Yeah.
So like it does that to explain like why it's floating, which I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah.
The first time you die, you have this lengthy cutscene where you meet the Grim Reaper. And the Grim Reaper like has, dry British humor out the wazoo. And he's telling you, he's like a short little guy with like a little squeaky kind of voice.
Yeah.
And he's like telling you, you know how cats have 9 lives? Well, squirrels are similar, which is super annoying because like I hate having to deal with squirrels dying all the time. Freaking, except he said it in a British way, not whatever voice I'm doing right now. But like they made a whole joke about that, which I thought was really great. And then here's one part that I read about the game's ending, which I think you'll find interesting. Of course, we didn't get there, so we didn't experience it ourselves. But apparently in the end of the game, you kill the evil king. I guess I should say plot-wise, Conker's trying to get home from a long night of drinking at the bar. Like he's like, that's the whole context. Like he's just trying to get home, but he has to like go through all these worlds first. There's an evil like Panther King who rules this area. And he has a table where one of the legs is like missing or broken. And so the mad scientist who's like basically enslaved to the king, he's like, my king, it seems that a red squirrel is the exact height of your missing leg table. So if we find a red squirrel, we can use him to fix. And so then like you have these minions who the inept pair of dumbass minions who are like trying to catch you throughout the game and whatever. So that's the context. But basically, like near the end of the game, you kill the king. Like one of the, I think they're called xenomorphs. I've never watched Alien, but like the little like belly bursting aliens where like they grow inside you and then they burst out and kill you.
Yeah.
The king has one of those for some reason. And so he dies that way. And then the monster is like coming towards Conker and he's like sure that he's about to die. But then the game quote unquote freezes. And Conker's like commenting on the fact that the game's frozen. And he's like, hey, programmers, can I get some help here? It looks like I'm about to die. Can you guys like fix that? And so they give him a katana which is why he has the katana in Smash Remix, I assume.
Oh, yeah.
He uses the katana to kill the xenomorph, and then he becomes the king. And so then, I forgot to mention this earlier, he has a girlfriend who appears in the very beginning, and she's made out to be kind of like one of those like blonde bimbo types, like very caricature, which, again, humor may not age well.
Right.
But she dies at some point during this like epic final battle with the king.
Oh, God.
So after the programmers help Conker to avoid death, he's like, oh, thank you, programmers. Oh, by the way, can you guys resurrect my girlfriend? But like the programmers are already gone, so they don't help. No. So she just stays dead.
Oh, God.
And that's like basically the end of the game from what I gather.
Oh, my God.
They were thinking about a sequel called Conker's Goin' Medieval, where Conker is now the king of this castle where the Panther used to be king, and he's like has to escape from the castle for some reason. I don't know. There's this whole part that I didn't read because I didn't have the time to like go through the whole thing. Yeah, so there's your idea of like narratively where this game goes. And again, like some really clever stuff, some stuff that I would probably like find really funny while I was playing it.
Yeah.
As far as the fourth wall and the programmers and all that kind of stuff. Right. But
yeah.
It's just, like you said, it's just interesting.
That is actually really hilarious. And I kind of wish we had gotten to some of that lore. But like for most of the game, lore stuff doesn't really happen. Like you're just kind of fumbling through a bunch of random crap.
Right.
And literally sometimes. And so on one hand, that's really cool. On the other hand, it's like, oh man, I wish I could have more stuff like that. But also to your point about breaking the fourth wall, a lot of times Conker looks at the camera whenever something like really weird or stupid is said or something ironic. And he's just like, and I love that. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, I think the story writing is great. I think there's also a lot of it that's like crude and hasn't aged well. And so that really dampens the mood a bit, I think, if you're not into that. But like, there's so many interesting and unique things about this game. So I can see the appeal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think the only thing we haven't really touched on yet would be the fact that there is apparently a pretty robust multiplayer mode.
Oh, yeah.
At least robust enough with enough mini games and such where they hosted competitions at colleges and they got a Playboy model to host.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so apparently the multiplayer is enough to warrant that kind of treatment.
Got to get that target audience.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think you and I played it, so we can't really comment on that as far as like the literal content of the game. Yeah. We talked about the duration and how like probably the 10 to 12 hour mark seems appropriate for a game like this. We talked about how maybe it's not the most replayable thing in the world because it's kind of like, you're experiencing a story more so than like enjoying the moment to moment, button pressing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Once again, similar to the gameplay, I feel like it's hard for me to give this a score because like so much of the score in the content section is usually based on like the narrative.
Yeah. And
like whatever that means for the game. And so like we've said, there's things that we really like and really don't like about the game's narrative and humor. So like, how do I balance that?
It's a very dynamic game.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to try to score it based on like an objective point of view and not my personal preference point of view. I'm going to attempt, but sometimes those things just overlap.
Right.
Anyway, I guess speaking of scores, I guess I'll go ahead and give my score. I've been thinking about it the entire time while we've been talking about this, and I think I'm going to give it a 93.
93.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't really agree with this number that I wrote down, but I wrote down to 60.
Dang.
And I think like I wrote it in that moment because I was fixating on like the gross out humor that I didn't like.
Yeah.
But I think coming back to what you said, or what we've both been saying about like the target audience and like the things it does well and did it accomplish what it set out to do, I think I do have to give that a lot higher of a score. I don't know if I'll give it as high. What did you say, a 98?
93.
I don't think I'll give it necessarily that high of a score, but you know what? I'll give it an 85.
85?
Because I think that the game, the story, that whole experience does have a lot to offer. I think it's worth like playing this game if you're not familiar with it.
Yeah.
If only for the sake of like experiencing it and just
yeah, I kind of agree with that.
Seeing what the hell was going on, right?
If you're willing to drop $150, you know.
Yeah.
Or, you know, other means, but But yeah, what I'm hearing is I am a very convincing person. If I've learned anything from this episode, is that I am very convincing. That's good. It's a good feeling.
You're convincing. I think I also convinced you to raise one of your scores, even though I wasn't necessarily trying to.
Yeah.
I think we both influence, and that comes back to something I've wondered about the whole format of our podcast. Like the idea of the scores has gotten like stranger and stranger to me as time has gone on. And I think this episode is just really like proof of that. Like sometimes scoring things can be really difficult, and sometimes
it's hard. It's not easy. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes I wonder like how much of a point is there to it? But then I look at our beautiful, theigcast.com website with everything sorted by score and all the stats and stuff. So then, then I kind of shut up in my mind. I'm like, oh yeah, scoring is great.
Yeah.
Then we get this beautiful chart.
Yeah. It's, the most definitive way to judge a video game is by our spreadsheet and our scoring system. So if you're ever wondering what the true, value of a game is, just look no further than theigcast.com.
Exactly. Not to be confused with IGN, because they don't got shit on us.
Yeah, they don't got shit on us. You mentioned like influencing, your opinion influencing mine. When you had told me the story about like how the ending was, I think that really influenced me on like, man, that is such a great ending.
Yeah.
And like, that's a really good, like humorous way to end it. And in execution, it might have been like much worse than what I'm imagining, but
yeah, theoretically it's great.
But yeah.
Yeah. We might have to look up the long play on YouTube, see how it turns out.
Yeah. Anyway, that's going to do it for that section. We'll get to some number crunching. So please listen to a word from our sponsors and we'll be right back. That's that dry British humor.
A word from our sponsors.
A word from our sponsors. One of these days you should put in like a completely bullshit ad. Like,
what if I just like sample some commercial from like 1967 or something for like car insurance?
Yeah,
that'd be a very dry British humor thing to do.
It would be, yeah.
Welcome back, friends. We have completed the very, I was going to say arduous number crunching, except Kevin has, he has his methods. He has his scientific methods to get us the numbers in a painless fashion. But I'll start by recapping my numbers. So for gameplay, I gave it a 60. Originally 50, but Kevin, his silver tongue talked me up a little bit. Aesthetics. Mine was a 95 overall, with both visuals and audio getting 95s. So that was easy math there. And then for my content, I gave it an 85, making the Peter grand total score for this game being a hot, fresh, cold, round, sharp, nice and even 80.
Nice. And to kind of break down my scores, of course, I gave the gameplay a 62. And then moving on to the aesthetics section, I gave the visuals a 78 and the audio an 81. And so that makes my aesthetics score of 79.5. And then for my content, I gave it a 93. So if you're keeping up, and my super complex, scoring algorithm here. That puts me at a 78.2, which is very similar to your score.
Yes.
I think we had some things that like varied a little bit in terms of opinion, but in the end it came together, and what we've determined is that we are just God tier, video game
reviewers.
Your reviewers, yeah.
Yeah. What ended up being the final IG score for this game?
The final IG score for this game is 79.1, which ranks it 43 out of 52 games that we've ranked.
What a shitty game, man. It only got a 79. Terrible.
Yeah.
We talk about this every time.
Yeah.
High bars.
Yeah. It's still a solid score, solid game.
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of people would like this game. And I don't know that it's necessarily our cup of tea, but I think we reviewed it in an objective enough manner to indicate that some people would like this game. And I could see why some people would think it's just the greatest thing ever. If you're a frat boy from the early 2000s, this is for you. Spend that $150 and have fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, this game, its value as a as a historical document of some kind is really high, I reckon.
Yeah.
And we had a good, several hours playing it, and we laughed, we cried, we shat ourselves, we nodded our heads, we shook our heads, we did everything, man.
For 4 or 5 hours. And that's
4 or 5 hours. Yep. Well, usually we wrap up these episodes by shouting out our lovely patrons, and it looks like we have one patron to shout out. We went through hell and high water navigating the new interface of Patreon, at least new to us. Kevin thanked the stars for his password manager, which allowed us access into this cryptic vault of patrons. And after all that adventure, Kevin, who did we see waiting for us?
We saw none other than Boomerang Probst himself.
Ooh.
So thank you, Boomerang Probst, for your free tier subscription to the Interstate Gamers podcast.
A free tier subscription with the last charge date, January 1st, 2024.
Yeah, so whatever that means.
Yeah, we don't know what's going on there, but we appreciate whatever the financial transactions may or may not be. We really appreciate the show of loyalty from Mr. Probst on this beautiful day.
And really all of you who listen to our podcast, we want to thank you too. I know it's been like a huge gap between our episodes, but I have noticed that there's still some listeners there, and I think they still really enjoy our podcast and check in to see if we're still creating stuff. And I think the answer is, if you're wondering, like, oh, is the Interstate Gamers done? No. This season, actually, we could talk about that in a second. It might be done, but I think it's just we've adopted more of a free form schedule to fit our lifestyle a little bit better. We're not young 20-year-old fresh out of college kids anymore. Life is progressing, and there's less time to do these things. So we're going to get to the episodes when we can, but I think it's just going to be kind of, at least from how I see it, a lifelong project of we'll just keep adding to it when we feel like it.
Yeah, I think it will be time for us to retire kind of the season idea. At least for me, I just love the idea of wrapping up season 5, 10 solid episodes, even if it took us multiple years to put a bow on the season. But I agree with you. I think this is something where whenever we find the inspiration, if there's a game we really want to talk about, if we have some gaming experience that resonates with us somehow, and we both get on the same page about that, I'd love to just, record an episode here and there whenever we feel like it, basically, right?
Yeah.
Because, totally agree with everything you said.
A far cry from the early days of IG.
Oh, yeah. We were what, once every 2 weeks?
We were pumping them out, yeah.
Yeah, machines we were.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, so I guess all that to say, we can't promise what or when the next episode will be, but the possibility is there. The door's open.
Mm-hmm. Possibilities are endless.
Right. If you want to join our $1 million per month tier on Patreon, don't be expecting that we'll give you an episode tomorrow as a reward for your payment.
Yeah. Probably should just shut this thing down.
Probably so. But I want to echo what Kevin said about, to anyone who's listened, we of course like to shout out the patrons because it's kind of a podcaster thing to do, right? And usually they're our friends, so we make it into like a funny little moment. But yeah, whoever listens, we really appreciate it. We do this for ourselves, and we also do it for anyone who is interested enough to join us on this journey that we've set for ourselves. So thank you all. Kevin just made the kind of like big bless motion, the prayer hands.
Indeed. But yeah, thanks to everyone who's listened. I had a great time with this podcast, and I can't wait to see you on the next episode.
Amen, brother.
Bye.
Love you too.
Nice. Good app,
Wow.
brother.
Good app. That was cathartic.